Okay, so we've learned a little bit about the physical nature of how vowels are produced. What about the characteristics of vowels that we're going to need to keep track of in this class? Well, I'm going to start in this section by describing the English vowel system, which is complex and unusual in many, many different ways. The English vowel system is pretty complicated, as I think any of the second language learners in this class would attest. It's a pretty complicated vowel system. So we'll talk about that a bit, and then we'll also talk a little bit about vowels more generally. So what you see under number 2 on page 2 of your handout here is one system for writing American English vowels in the IPA. This is roughly what I'm going to be using in this class. And yeah, so what do we have here? Well, we're basically looking at a two-dimensional chart here. And the up-down dimension, naturally enough, is referred to as the high, mid, low dimension here. So high and low, and then in between them you have mid-vowels. And it says tongue height in this chart. It's a little bit more complicated than that. We'll talk about that shortly. And then the other dimension in the chart is the front to back dimension, where the middle part there is called central rather than mid. So normally mid is used for middle height and central is used for middle backness. It's a little bit hard to remember, but you'll figure it out. Right? So English has a whole lot of different vowels here. And down the front there, you'll see 5 front vowels. Beat, bit, bait, bet, and bat. Those are the 5 front vowels in English. Down around the back here, you'll see 5 back vowels. This is boot, put, boat, bore, and bomb, those vowels. And then there's 2 vowels kind of in the middle here. One of them is the vowel in but, and there's this little funny upside down E vowel, the schwa, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. It's a little bit more complicated than the rest of these. You can see that in that square on the right side of the vowel chart, there's a box and it says all those vowels are rounded. So oo, o, and ah are all pronounced with rounded lips. Right? So you can see my lips in the vowel oo are rounded. In English, it is a general fact that most back vowels are rounded, while no front vowel is rounded. In general, that ah vowel is also a little bit tricky. Where did I put my chalk? Oh, here it is. This backwards C, or it's sometimes called open O vowel, represents the vowel sound ah. And in American English, there's a split between varieties of American English where this is contrastive and distinct from the vowel ah, versus varieties where it's not contrastive and distinct. In eastern New England, where I come from, this is not said to be a general property of eastern New England English, but I'm pretty sure that I have a contrast here. And the classic minimal pair for varieties of English that do have a contrast would be this little portable bed versus the past tense of catch, where this vowel in cot is going to be a low back unrounded vowel, and this vowel in caught is going to be a slightly higher and rounded vowel. So ah, aw, cot, caught. Most places in the United States no longer maintain this contrast if they ever did. And in particular, in West Virginia, basically nobody will have this vowel distinction. So for English words, if we're talking about English words in this class, and you're not sure whether it's an ah word or an aw word, it really doesn't matter. It's not too important, especially in the varieties of American English that you're going to hear around Morgantown, West Virginia. In general, there's kind of a pool of distinction keepers in the East Coast, especially in the Northeast. And then there's said to also be a pocket of contrast keepers in the San Francisco Bay Area, although I lived there for 2 years and I'm not sure I heard much of this. The rest of California definitely doesn't have this distinction. So it's probably dying out in modern American English grammar, but worth knowing about. Anyway, as they've indicated here, the vowel that appears before the English R sound, is usually of this quality in words like bore. So those are three properties of the English vowel system: their height, their backness, and their rounding. There's also this tense-lax distinction that I talked about last week, and this is pretty unusual. Most languages don't have things like this. For English, basically you'll check like 6 different textbooks and they'll give you 6 different lists of which vowels are tense and which ones are lax. I'm going to use the classification in this table on page 2 here for this class. I'm going to say all the vowels on the left are tense. That includes E, U, A, O, and A. And I'll say the ones on the right are all lax. I, and A. So these correspond to the vowels in tense vowels, beat, boot, bait, bet, boat, and bot. And lax vowels in bit, put, bet, but, and bat. Okay, so those are the English vowels. You'll see a little bit of variation in how people transcribe different vowel sounds. As I mentioned, the mid-tense vowels in English, A and O, are phonetically have sort of 2 different qualities. They're diphthongs. So the A vowel starts like an E and ends like a Y, and the O vowel starts like an O and ends like an U. But normally, because for phonology they don't really act like diphthongs, I'm just going to use usually these normal IPA symbols to write them. If I were being very careful, I could write them like this. Yeah. Shown on the top right here is the vowel quadrilateral from the International Phonetic Alphabet. And this is a fuller set of vowels that would apply across a lot of different languages. And so again, these are going to be organized in terms of vowel height, that's from top to bottom, and vowel backness, that's from right to left. The front vowels are going to be on the left, the back vowels are going to be on the right, and the pairs of vowels that you see next to each other represent unrounded vowels on the left and rounded ones on the right. So, also the high-low dimension here is labeled as close to open. And that's talking about basically how open your vocal tract is. So the highest vowels are said to be close, and the lowest vowels are said to be open. You can use whatever terminology you want. I find the high, mid, low terminology to be a little bit clearer and easier, but if you want to use close and open, that's also fine. So for instance, at the top left of that vowel quadrilateral, you'll find a close or high front vowel, and you'll find a pair of them actually, where the one on the left is unrounded high front E, and the one on the right, which is written with the letter Y in the IPA, is high front rounded E. E, U. That's what those pairs are. English doesn't have any minimal vowel rounding contrast. As we mentioned before, basically all of the non-low back vowels are round and everything else is unrounded in English. So these vowel dimensions of height and backness, usually introductory textbooks will tell you that vowel height and backness refer to the position of the tongue body in the vocal tract. That's not exactly true, and I actually don't like to tell my students that because there's a much better explanation that's maybe even, well, it's probably not as easy to understand, but it's much more right. So the idea here is that if you have a high vowel, it's because your tongue body is high up in your mouth. A low vowel, it's because your tongue body is lower in your mouth. A front vowel, it's because your tongue body is forward in your mouth. And a back vowel is because your tongue body is back in your mouth. But that's not quite true. What these really are auditory properties. They're properties of what you hear when you hear a vowel. And they have very well understood acoustic correlates, which are called formants. So we're going to discuss formants when we do acoustics in a few weeks in detail. But they're some of the most important acoustic properties of speech sounds, especially for vowels. So really, what we're talking about when we're talking about the high-low dimension and the front-back dimension are the frequencies of the formants of the vowel. So I'll tell you what these are in a little bit more detail in a couple weeks. We'll look into it ourselves. But let me just tell you that if you measure these formants in different vowels, and you measure the first two formants, which are referred to as F1 and F2, and then you make a plot of them, as in the bottom right of page 2 here, what you'll get is what's shown in that plot. So these are the formant values for I, and A. That's going down the left side. And going down the right side, you're getting the values for U, A, and A. And yeah, what do you see there? Well, it looks an awful lot like that vowel quadrilateral, right, that we just saw from the IPA, except here we're getting these positions by actually measuring the physical properties of the sounds involved, their acoustic properties. And what that's telling us is that really vowel height refers to something like the first formant frequency, and vowel backness refers to something like the second formant frequency. That said, we'll just talk about high, low, and front, back. We don't need to necessarily know everything about the formants. We will learn something about formants in a few weeks. So moving on to page 3 now. As I mentioned, English also has, diphthongs. And I said that these vowels, the A and O vowels, are phonetically somewhat like diphthongs, but phonologically they're probably not. Diphthongs are vowels that start with one quality and end with another. Nobody agrees on how to transcribe diphthongs, at least English ones. So you'll check 8 different introductory texts. You'll get 8 different ways of writing these diphthongs. For the big 3 diphthongs in English, which are I, ow, and oi, I usually use these symbols. So I use I, for the vowel in bite. I usually use ow or ow for the vowel in bout. And I usually use oi for the vowel in boy. So this is bite, bout, boy. If I'm being super careful, I use this little ligature mark, this tie between the 2 characters, to show that these are diphthongs. They're not 2 separate vowels next to each other. They're a single vowel that begins like this and ends like this. But again, in English, it's actually usually completely unambiguous whether you're talking about a diphthong or a sequence of 2 vowels. So it's not super important, but that is part of the notation technically. You'll see lots of other possibilities for how to write these. So like this is one possibility for ow. You'll also see people use like this one, or you might see it with the tense vowel for oo. You might see it with this different symbol for the first part of it. You'll see all sorts of different ways of writing these. It really doesn't matter as long as you get roughly the phonetic character right. You can use any one of these that you find most convenient. Right? Another point actually on the difference between these 2 symbols. So this is so-called typewriter A versus this plain A. And in the official IPA, they will tell you that this is a low back unrounded vowel, and this is a low front unrounded vowel, something like ah, 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 ah. In reality, most phonologists, when they're writing down speech sounds, don't really distinguish between these at all. And you'll see this even in the illustration of the English vowels, which is copied from a textbook under section 2 here. They use this typewriter A symbol to refer to the low back unrounded vowel ah. It's kind of annoying that people don't keep this distinction right, but you need to get used to it because they don't. So when you see this vowel, unless it's explicitly being contrasted here, people almost certainly mean a low back unrounded vowel or maybe a low central unrounded vowel. They use these more or less, indistinguishably. So you'll definitely see this used to refer to the vowel ah, and it's not official IPA, but it's very common. The last thing here, which is kind of complex in the English vowel system, is this little upside down E that pops up right in the middle of the vowel space. And it's referred to as schwa. So that is schwa vowel. And schwa is a little bit different than all the other categories that we're looking at. You'll often see this called a mid-central unrounded vowel, which is often true phonetically, but certainly not always. Schwa is more complicated because schwa is not in English actually a phonetic category at all. It is a phonological category. And it's basically used to refer to an unstressed vowel in English that doesn't really have any requirements for height, backness, or rounding. So phonetically, some things that are schwas will sound relatively mid-central unrounded, like Some of them will sound higher, a little bit more like U or I or I. You'll get a range of phonetic values for what this actually sounds like. The thing that makes them all schwa is that they're unstressed vowels that don't have requirements on their height, backness, or rounding. So one way of trying to illustrate that, unlike the other vowel symbols used here, schwa is not a phonetic category. It's a phonological analysis of English. So I'm trying to illustrate that by moving stress around within English morphemes. And I'm going to do that using this ic suffix, which is usually spelled IC, and it moves the stress in the stem that it attaches to. So if you take words or roots or stems like atom and system, as shown on the left here, these are stressed on their first syllables in English. And stressed syllables have the full range of whatever, 14 or 17 vowels that we just talked about. Those are all available in stressed syllables in English. But when you take the stress away, all of a sudden there's very few vowel qualities available in unstressed syllables. So as you can see here, when you move the stress by putting this ic suffix on, it actually stresses the second syllable, so you wind up with atomic and systemic. Now, do these first syllables in atomic and systemic have exactly the same phonetic vowel in them? No, probably not. At least in my speech, I think the first one is more like an and the second one in systemic is more like an I. But the point here is that whether they're a little bit phonetically more high or more front, these don't contrast. Right? They don't have any height, backness, or rounding requirements. I can say atomic, that sounds fine. I can say atomic, that was with a higher front or vowel. You probably didn't even hear it because it's also fine as a pronunciation of schwa. I can say systemic with a higher front or pronunciation. It means the same thing as systemic. Right? It doesn't even sound weird to say the second one. And I promise you, if you looked at those vowels in some software to see what their acoustics are, they'd be different. But they're not contrastive. It's just a variable category because it doesn't have any requirements for backness, height, or rounding. And that's what schwa is in English. So even if a vowel kind of sounds like an I, as long as it's phonologically a schwa, I'm just going to write it with the schwa symbol. If you want to write it with I instead, that's fine, right? But that's what schwa is about. The actual phonetic quality of these vowels is going to vary widely by speaker. Different speakers will have different schwas by word, by phonological context. And so they're not always going to be mid-central or unrounded. I'm going to use that symbol to refer to any unstressed English vowel that is not an E, O, or U. Those are the only other possible unstressed vowels in English. You can get unstressed E, usually at the end of a word, in words like happy or lucky. Unstressed O, pretty rare, words like bingo or dingo. Unstressed U, again, pretty rare. So I think like statue probably has an unstressed U vowel. But those are all relatively rare. Schwa is far more common.